Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for the time this evening for BPMA's November event about product leaders as general managers. I'll share my screen and just confirm when you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the time again this evening. We'll go ahead and get started here. So I wanted to quickly introduce BPMA as an organization before we get started on the topic here, but just thank everyone again for their time. And a quick outline of what BPMA is really all about is for cultivating events for the local and national product community here to help product managers land new opportunities, to help them level up their skills and help them to engage with their colleagues and peers in topics that are of interest to them. And we do that through a number of different methods, through the monthly events like we're here today, through organizations like our mentorship program, through content like the blog, and through the product executives forum for senior VP and above product leaders. Now, we couldn't do it alone. We have a number of sister organizations that work with us to help bring all of these things together. So a shout out to a few of those: Agile Project Open, Women in Product, as well as Product Camp, which I'm sure a number of you have been to. I also want to call out our sponsors, thank them for their partnership to help these events be possible. And I'll pause for a minute here to ask if there are any sponsors on the line who want to quickly address the audience here to give the members an overview of your organization and what you do for the product community. Great, moving on here. I want to give a shout out to our next event, which will be on December 9th. And that's going to be a workshop-based event on how to lead product reviews. So really tying back to the helping you level up your skills as a product manager, how to think about leading product reviews, and how to lead one. Looking at tonight's agenda, we're going to quickly give background on the topic at hand and how to think about being a business manager, a general manager, leading a business line, and what that means for your career as a product manager. We're going to follow that background and that context, that level setting, with a panel discussion from our panelists here, who will introduce themselves in a moment. Then we're going to have a small group discussion and followed by Q&A with the panel members via breakout rooms after. So for that, what I'll quickly do in order of left to right is ask that the speakers come off mute, introduce themselves, and give the audience a little background so they can get a sense of your perspective as we go through the panel.
Sure. So I guess I'll kick it off. My name's Nora Tucker. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I'm currently a product lead at a company called Gusto. And we focus on payroll, HR, and benefits software catering to small businesses. I've had kind of a variety of different functional roles over the course of my career. Started out as an applications engineer, which is kind of a glamorous way for saying tech support, which is how I leveraged my chemical engineering degree. And had an opportunity to manage a team fairly early in my career, as well as hold a product marketing title, which I later learned I was doing both product management and product marketing, which I think is a fairly common scenario. I spent some time overseas, predominantly in Asia, more management inside of an applications engineering context, as well as 5 years with Intuit, helping them expand their QuickBooks Online offering into Asian markets. And that's the first time I actually held the product manager title, and rose up the ranks and eventually managed a team across the region. And then last thing I'll note is I also held a role in kind of a sales/marketing position doing international web revenue expansion for Docusign. So again, a lot of different functional areas, but definitely a product management, product marketing theme across.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name's John Burns. I am founder of a company called Modern Product. This is a PM services, like product management services business where we work with software companies to help them essentially build better products more efficiently. And so a lot of what I focus on with my clients is how to leverage data-informed best practices to be more efficient, to make better decisions, et cetera. My background, I've been basically building and launching software for the last 19 years. I started my career as a software engineer, did that for a few years, but then really for the last 16 years, I've focused on software product management, and I love it. And I've had the fortune to have worked across multiple industries, everything from video games to healthcare IT to mobile retail, and even a stint in like IT collaboration tech and whatnot. So that's been a lot of fun. And along the way, I'm very much a technology geek. And so I've been lucky to have launched products across lots of different platforms as well. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yassine Abou Noor. I am the VP of product at a company called Spoiler Alert. We are Boston-based. Yay, Boston. Spoiler Alert is a startup, and what we're doing is we're building a SaaS platform that helps large food manufacturers sell excess inventory before it goes bad. So it's a startup with a mission, which I love. In terms of experience, I started out as an operations guy. I started out in supply chain, pivoted into product management. I like to say that I didn't choose the startup life. The startup life chose me. And so for me, it's typically been the first PM hire at a startup, typically solving difficult problems, in this case, supply chain one, actually typically a supply chain one, whether it's in hardware or in grocery. And yeah, excited to be here and share what I've learned so far.
Excellent. Thank you to our panelists. Well, I'll quickly just go over some background context setting on the topic and why being a business leader matters. And I won't read these three icons verbatim, but I think a helpful way to think about why thinking about the end in mind matters is because it helps you tomorrow think through, what is my role today going to turn into? It helps you today in thinking with the end in mind. And also helps your peers, right? It helps your colleagues, it helps your collaborators, it helps the adjacent business lines. If you're thinking holistically about the business in whatever capacity that means for your role today, maybe you're just starting, you're an associate, you're a junior, and thinking about the business holistically means a very small sliver of your line, or maybe you're a more experienced PM closely tracking to being a GM of a business line. This helps think about those adjacent business lines as well. As folks who have been in product a while are familiar with, and for folks who haven't been in product for a while, welcome, but there is no one size fits all career path for the product manager. I think that's important to point out as we have this slide here that depicts a career path. It's important to remember that there is no right or wrong path with this. One thing that we will focus on here is less on the first stage of product manager, senior, director, and VP, which in many ways you can think about as building blocks or moving up a pyramid, building on the previous skills that you've acquired from your experiences, to the final end of the road, or where the end nodes here, which the three that we've listed, which are not encompassing, but are common, is a CEO, a general manager, or a chief product officer, a SVP of product. And thinking about the general manager role, it helps you think about being a good product manager, not just then, but now. So again, touching on the earlier theme of starting or continuing with the end in mind, is thinking about being a good general manager, a good steward of the business, what is required from someone who's in that role, and pulling it into your role today is it's a lot of the same themes, right? If we look at the left side here, whether it's support issues and synthesizing those into major themes, whether it's thinking about the technology stack or sales or the business costs of producing your product, or the incremental costs of expanding past MVP or V2 or wherever you may be, is it's help refining the perspectives that you have to your PM decision machine or your brain in order to make the best decisions. So a good way to think about it is that a general manager or a CEO, for example, needs to not just take the top-down strategy and distribute it, but you as a product manager get to think about strategy within your vertical and how it intersects with the various business lines. So you can almost think about it in terms of your CEO at whatever company you work with, or if you're the CEO at your company, you certainly have a top-down strategy that you're going to communicate to your team. But as a product manager, maybe you're not the CEO, you also have a strategy for your sliver of the business. And we portrayed it here as kind of a vertical first horizontal axes. So I'll tie this all together before we turn it over to the panelists to think about leading business lines, general management as a trajectory of a product manager's career, to say that this isn't just for your future self, 15, 20 years, 5 years from now. These are skills and traits that you can actually bring into your product management profession today. So with that, we're going to have some questions for the panelists. And the first one I'll ask, and feel free, any one of the panelists who feels compelled to jump at this one, do you agree with the 3 core assertions that required for advancement, that you'll make better decisions and the business will execute better if you adopt a general management mindset? Why or why not?
I can jump in, I suppose. You know, in general, I would just throw out there, I do agree with the ideas posed as part of this discussion. I think the one thing that Michael, I'm glad you called out as you're setting the stage for our talk tonight, is that what I've noticed and what I've experienced myself personally is that career advancement means something different to every different person out there, right? And for product management, I think one of the coolest parts of the job is that we have so many different options and directions that we could take with our careers. And so whether it's to advance up the career ladder chain within a company the company ranks itself into C-suite level roles, or it's to become an entrepreneur and start your own company, or it's to equally as cool and exciting is if you decide you want to sort of be like the master of your domain, right? And you don't necessarily want to manage people, but you just want to become a master craft product manager who's an expert in some very specific domain. I think those are all admirable paths to take. And I would say that no matter what path you decide to take, I would argue that just growing and developing your business acumen over time is going to help you no matter what that path is. It's just business acumen is such a generic term, right? It's pretty broad. So it sort of depends on what path you decide to take and whatnot, that you'll have to sort of cater to, you know, where you focus your energy and your opportunities.
So I'm gonna hop on and second that. I categorically agree to all 3 of the assertions, but I think the one that resonates the most with me is the one around the business executing better. I think one of the things that makes the product role at whatever level super interesting is that really your loyalty as a product person is to the strategy and executing the strategy. You know, there are vanity metrics out there, but we call them vanity metrics, which should tell you something. To us, the measure of success is ultimately the success of the business. And so at any level, it is incumbent upon us to kind of take all the different stimuli we're exposed to, run all of those through the PM machine and deliver some kind of output. And it becomes very difficult to deliver the optimal output, the thing that works for most of the business or for all of the business, without really having a deep understanding of the business as a whole, of the strategy as a whole. And you know, while we'll interact with that at different levels depending on where you are in your career path or the size of org or what have you, I think that really is what separates successful PMs.
You can shut that off.
I think that's really what separates successful PMs and orgs from, you know, less fortunate ones or less successful ones.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page with these two guys. This is not going to be the controversial part of this panel, but to be maybe a bit contrarian, there is, of course, always those corner cases or exceptions. So if you're an uber technical PM and you specialize deep in a certain, like one area that comes to mind for me based on some of the places I've worked is compliance. And compliance is not something that's negotiable. You know, you just need to go do it. It's sure there's business outcomes that are going to come from it, but it's not based on the work you're doing necessarily. So in that scenario, I think as a PM, it's acceptable to go heads down on that space. But that's a pretty short-term point of view. And if you do want to either cross industries or advance to other parts of the company, you're probably going to need your pick your head up and start thinking about the broader GM aspects of the job, both for advancement as well as starting to get into better decision making, et cetera. But yeah, in general, if I'm not trying to be contrarian, I agree with those three premises.
Great. We'll ease into the conflict here amongst the panelists. I think to summarize what everyone was saying is being a business leader, adopting a general management mindset does check the boxes of being required for advancement, enables you to make more holistic, better decisions, and in turn also enables your company as a whole to act and perform better. Now, the next question here is drawing on some of your previous experiences. I would love to hear from each of you the differences that you've seen in product acting or maybe not acting as a good business leader. And if you give an extreme example in each one of those directions, that would be helpful.
I'll kick us off maybe. So to couch things in startup terms, which is what I'm familiar with, I've seen startups where the founders have come from a more sales-oriented background, for example, and not given a lot of space for product practitioners to flourish or do their thing or, you know, second guess or what have you. And that tends to result in a very skewed organization. It is possible to end up a product manager in such an organization. You become a bit of a pass-through entity where, you know, you do what the CEO says. I mean, ultimately, in any startup, there's a lot of that. But in a startup where there isn't a lot of product discipline at the top, you find yourself in very dire situations very quickly. There's a lot of chasing shiny objects and not a lot of focus, which is a lot of what product brings to the table. Conversely, you know, there are startups which have product-oriented founders. You can also be a pass-through entity in those, but at least then you have the benefit of learning. In that case, at least the founder has a clear sense of product market fit, has a clear sense of strategy of where they're going, of what accept trade-offs are for the stage that the org is in. And those two things tend to be night and day in terms of not just what you're doing day to day, but just the scope and the impact that you can have, and just knowing whether you're going to be an executor or a foil, and whether you're actually going to be in the room for those strategic decisions or not.
And maybe to talk a little bit about some of my experiences, I would say to where I am right now is probably one of the more extreme I've seen. And I think part of this is a strategic move on the part of leadership to do a dramatic force of the organization one direction with the expectation that we're never going to get quite to that point, but we're going to settle somewhere in the middle. That's actually where they want us to be. But we're leveraging a framework where we talk a lot about the difference between output, customer impact, or just impact, and then outcomes. And I think some organizations have a tendency to just focus on the output of the team and talk about, oh, in this cycle, what do we ship? And at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Unless you have that impact in that outcome that you're looking for. And so we've been really forced to think about that framework. And on a monthly basis, we're reporting out to senior leadership, and they don't want to hear about what we shipped. It's all about the business impact that we've created and what are the customer outcomes that we've driven. And so it's really forced us to constantly be starting with the impact and the outcomes from a PM level all the way down to an engineer level, and changed our framing and our conversations quite a bit. There's definitely, one other thing I'll add there is that we have shared metrics now with our business counterparts. So we're talking about how we're driving customer ads and how we're driving revenue. So of course the business loves that, that we're on the hook alongside them. Our challenge then becomes attribution to really prove that this is what we did to drive these numbers, given that it's a shared goal. But I think that just forcing that conversation has been really healthy. And again, I think there's some downsides to it, which I can speak about later, but I think ultimately it's been a really good move for the company. End of the spectrum is my time into it. Now, granted, that was a little bit different in that I was based in Singapore and I was like trying to figure out if we could take QuickBooks Online into these new markets. And then it being into it, we had pretty deep pockets. So it's kind of like a really well-funded startup. So we didn't talk about revenue the entire time I was there. All we cared about is trying to figure out product market fit and then ultimately trying to drive customer ads. But again, we kind of didn't care about the revenue associated with it. So it's a very, very different type of product management and how we thought about the numbers and what was really important. So it's not that we didn't care about the business. In some ways, I was way more involved in the go-to-market strategy at that point in time. But from a PM perspective, it's very different than what I'm experiencing at Gusto and us trying to drive revenue.
I'll share two anecdotes from my professional experiences way back in the day that I think are two extremes that I've experienced. One is fairly early in my career when I had just started working in product management. I was working for Microsoft, and Microsoft being, at the time, 70,000 people. I was working in the Xbox division, and I found myself as a PM limited in terms of my exposure to the business side of that division, just because of organizational structure and the size of the company, et cetera, even though the games division was at the time basically like a large startup with, like Nora said, deep pockets as well. And so what I experienced was one of being in some sense forced to just focus on execution and checking the box of things that we were shipping and delivering on instead of the bigger picture. And it's one of the reasons why I ended up leaving Microsoft to go to grad school to pursue an MBA, was to actually expand my business acumen. And so that was one decision. And then to bookend my graduate experience, I came out of business school with a newly minted MBA and joined a 12-person startup. So quite the contrast with my Microsoft experience to date. And that was awesome in the sense that I got to wear many hats, as Yassine has mentioned and probably lives daily. But I found myself wearing the sales hat and the marketing hat and the product hat, loving it, but also, risky because all of my business experience to date had been academic from my grad program. And so I love the fact that the leadership there at that 12-person startup gave me that trust and that empowerment to do those things. And it helped me, but it also helped the business. But I would just end with a comment that not all startups are like that, as Yassine mentioned, which is a lot of it depends on the culture and the leadership and the perspective of the founder and the CEOs and others there. So I got lucky, but definitely two extremes I experienced.
Awesome. The next question here is for individuals who may be interested in this, becoming a business leader, general manager, adopting that mindset, owning a business line perhaps. Can you provide some ideas or your perspective on the most successful models of being a business leader or attributes of a general manager that maybe you've done, or perhaps that you've seen in others that you would bestow, give guidance to the other individuals on this call? And maybe John, I'll start back with you again and put you back on the clock if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. I think about when I think about some of the mentors that I've had over the years and some of the opportunities I've been given. I kind of think about it in two senses. One is, I'll just make the observation, like being a product manager, I think most of us on this call probably are very curious, very driven, ask a lot of questions, and in terms of driving the best products that we can, we think about all of the information that we can synthesize and aggregate in order to make better decisions. So in some sense, I'm assuming that's maybe one of the blueprints or the foundations of folks who want to be product managers. And so I guess one part of my response is to leverage the kind of the what I would argue is probably the genetic attributes of a lot of product managers, which is curiosity and drive, to use that to fuel your efforts to expand your horizons, right? Into general management principles, to have coffee with and be the squeaky wheel with your marketing counterpoints and your sales counterpoints and whatnot. I think that approach is important in finding the mentorship, not just to hone your product management craft in general, but also your business savvy with different mentors. I think all of those. I hope I'm answering the question. I took it a different way when I was preparing for this. I was thinking about organizational and cultural models that allow product managers to be able to grow into this sort of general management frame of mind. But I hope I at least halfway answered the question.
Well, answer the question that you prepared for too. Let's provide that insight.
Yeah, just real quick. I think what I found in my experiences, at least, is maybe three things, one of which I've touched on, which is product managers need to be empowered, right? They need to have a space within their company and the trust of their leadership to be able to grow and to have that time to interact with various functional groups. I think there needs to be forums in place organizationally, like what I've seen really successful is like product steering type meetings or product strategy meetings where product managers can bring to the table their point of view that is holistic and sort of strategic in nature, but be able to have that negotiation and that conversation with the business leaders across the organization. I think that's an organizational construct that I've seen work really well. And then number three is, and I'm very biased here because it's what I base my business off of, is just making sure that data is always at the center of any conversations or recommendations that are being put forward. So.
Great. Who else wanted to answer that question with regards to successful models that they've seen for being business leaders or GMs?
I might build off a little bit on what John was originally talking about, but I think I totally agree with the curiosity and just to add some specificity around it from my perspective. I feel like some PMs can have a tendency to spend a ton of time with their engineers and not give all that much attention to marketing and sales and customer care and their other cross-functional partners. And I think that's a huge miss, especially in the context in which we're talking about the PM role and becoming more of a GM. You've got to understand what's going on with sales and marketing and spend adequate time with them and factor that into your product strategy and your product roadmap. So yeah, making sure you spend time with those counterparts. And when they're talking about the numbers, like learn all those acronyms, right? And when they start throwing around ACV and CAC and all this stuff, like ask the question to understand what that means and why it's important. And what does success look like? Like, what are some good comps out in the industry, especially if you're, more of a startup or pre-IPO? what are we trying to achieve here for a successful IPO? Don't just sit there and be like, oh, I hope we go public one day, without, being completely ignorant to what are the business metrics that are going to lead to a successful IPO. So yeah, don't shy away from those conversations. And based on my experience, your business counterparts will be stoked if you engage with them. They love when product engages. So don't be afraid of asking for that time or asking the dumb questions. I think it'll be very welcome.
So absolutely nothing to disagree with there. I guess what I'll point out as well is John mentioned autonomy and empowerment. Nora was kind of giving examples of that. I think as a leader, no matter where you are in an organization, there are a couple of things that you have to do, whether you're in product or a general manager. Some of that is guiding decision-making process. And, if you're more junior, you might not get to do a lot of that. But I think what is true across product, regardless of where you are, is establishing shared context, right? You want everybody to be living in the same reality. You don't want sales to think we're killing it while the engineers are ripping out their hair. You don't want the engineers to feel like, hey, we're cranking out code and releasing daily while the numbers aren't moving on the other side. And so, organizations can go from 15 people to Microsoft-sized orgs, but ultimately you will have to delegate, you will have to decentralize, and that's where that autonomy comes in. But that can backfire greatly unless you invest the time in creating that shared context. And so that's, I think, that's the top side of that model, where at the bottom you want to give autonomy, you want to decentralize decision-making, but at the top you have to invest in creating the context that allows everybody to make the right decisions. You're giving the right inputs, you're giving all the inputs to that PM machine.
I think that's very helpful, summarizing your outlines for how to think about attributes of being a successful business leader or general manager that you've seen or done in your time. I think I'd love to ask the inverse of that, right? And as people are either at that stage in their career or earlier working towards that stage in their career, what guidance would you give them about either potential pitfalls or challenges to growing into that you've seen, and perhaps not just simply just the inverse of what you said are the good attributes, but maybe some other context there. And Yassine, I'd love to turn back to you and have you start that.
Sure. So you don't always find yourself in ideal situations. I think that goes without saying. But I think a lot of product management, at least particularly as you talk about career advancements, is about proving yourself, right? If the business is doing well as a whole, I think that's great, but attribution is difficult. And sometimes it's hard to say it was this decision that somebody made 6 months ago that pulled us back from this abyss that we would have fallen into if we'd started building that feature or what have you. And so if you find yourself in a less than ideal situation, I think one of the biggest learnings for me is sometimes you just got to play ball a bit. You have to establish credibility. It's a matter of kind of going through and getting the sets and reps. Maybe the decisions will not always go the way you want, but you'll be there. You'll create that shared reality. You'll be in that retro to dissect why that decision didn't go the way you did. You'll rack up those quick wins, and over time, you'll be in a place where it almost seems ridiculous to not give you the autonomy and to not share that context with you. If somebody thought that it was a waste of time or that it was, beyond your purview, you rack up a couple of quick wins and their opinion is going to change pretty quickly.
I'll take a slightly different spin on that, but just thinking about, like I said, with Gusto right now, we're really focused on some of the shared business metrics, which I think is really healthy. But yeah, I think a potential challenge with that, if you're just focused on we get revenue, is you can lose sight of a longer term strategic product roadmap. If you're like, okay, every month I've got to show some kind of impact. And some projects just take longer than that, right? If you need to re-architect something or create, a new engine of some sort from the ground up, you can't do that in a month. And so sometimes if culturally you're very focused on that, or from a PM perspective, you're like, I'm really trying to prove myself and trying to show that this impact on a regular basis, it could be harder to allow yourself or have the business give you the space and the freedom to prioritize those longer term work streams. And I think that can be detrimental. It can be a little short-sighted if you only operate in that way. And another, I don't see this at Gusto, but I've seen this at more enterprise or really sales-driven companies, like Docusign is an example. You get these potential, oh, it's like the sales guy comes in and he's like, I've got, a $5 million deal. I need this one thing. And I've got 20 other customers that will line up to, and they sell you this huge story and tens of millions of dollars. And you've got to learn how to develop a healthy skepticism there to vet those deals, because you'll probably chase a few. You'll completely distract yourself from your product roadmap, and 9 times out of 10 the revenue doesn't come in where you thought it would. So again, there's balance there, and part of that just comes with time and probably getting burned a few times. But it doesn't mean you don't pay attention to the revenue. It's just, again, trying to balance that and weigh that against what you believe are the right things to do to be successful in the market.
I love that you shared that, Nora. Yeah, that's in some sense, I've felt in my past experiences like whack-a-mole, based on the shiny object of the day, which maybe everyone here on this call has experienced. But yeah, my response sort of supports what Nora just shared. The challenge I would talk about is, well, maybe the anecdote to start with is I was in a role. I was a product leader for a company a few years ago, where I was heading up our consumer product experience side of things. And the challenge was that we had this initiative, this goal to build a new reimagined consumer experience for our users, and yet our primary revenue driver for the company at the time was largely related to display advertising. And so in this very specific case, there was this conflict of interest, which I think many of us experience on a daily basis, but where the decisions I wanted to make as a consumer-focused product manager were very different than what the business needed to make in terms of generating ad revenue. And the whole, like Nora's touched on, the importance of really understanding your numbers and what your goals are and the outcomes that you need to drive. Those were a daily thing that we were looking at in terms of like the ratios of number of display ads we had to serve up, and the amount of engagement that we had to drive with our consumers hitting our site, and number of pages and time on site, et cetera, et cetera. And so the challenge had to do with just the conflicts of interest in terms of the role I was in versus what the business needed to do. Now, all that being said, it wasn't a bad thing. It was just, if anything, it sort of supports what we're talking about today, which is if I were a very narrow focused product person, only focused on building the best consumer experience, I probably would have been, fired like the next day because none of the ads would have made it onto that site. But I'm glad we had those discussions, and I'm glad we had those forums to be able to look at that stuff where I did have a seat at the table. So.
Very helpful in terms of potential pitfalls to avoid, things to be mindful of as people are growing in their careers and pursuing this path. We're going to ask the last question here before we open it up to the small group for questions. And then as a reminder, we'll do breakout rooms to do networking after that. But the last question really is for individuals who may want to pursue this business leader path, this general management path. How do you weigh and think about things that they should do in terms of picking up additional projects at work, pursuing an MBA, as you mentioned, John, or looking to get certifications, whether it's product management certification, other traditional Six Sigma, project management, other things. So how do you think about continuing education, additional projects at work, and certification. And maybe Nora, I'll look to you to start this one.
Yeah, for me, I'd say the most valuable, frankly, is just where you are right now at whatever company that is, starting to lean into those conversations, starting to snuggle up to your sales and marketing counterparts, ask about, what do all these business metrics mean? Understand how are they motivated? How are they compensated? And then how can you align product to that? Again, not with a narrow view, but just helping you to get outside of your engineering pod and in your daily stand-ups and thinking more about the business. Personally, I think that's certainly much more valuable than like a certification that you go immerse yourself for a day or two. And even frankly, in comparison to an MBA, I think there's another set of decision-making criteria there for sure. But I think this is an easy one to get started on like tomorrow without a huge investment of any resources. Just a couple conversations and then a little bit of a mindset shift.
What I'll add to that as well is be very mindful of what's happening inside your business, but also businesses don't exist in a vacuum. I think as you move up, domain expertise starts playing much more of a role, particularly in highly regulated industries or industries with idiosyncrasies. And no matter what industry you're in, there are going to be idiosyncrasies. And just leaning into that stuff as well, being mindful of it, understanding why sales might have to sell the way they do, or why we have to go through RFP processes and the pain that incurs on all parties, or what have you, as to further augment your understanding of not just how your business operates, but why your business operates the way it does, so that whenever you transfer or whatever you do next, you then know what is transferable and what is not. Your pattern matching kicks in, and that's essentially what experience is, right?
I think the only thing you ever need is the Six Sigma black belt. That's it. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I agree with everything Yassine and Nora are saying. The only thing I would add to it is what I've found valuable, and this isn't for everyone, but is seeking out mentors that go beyond just your domain or your product management, but finding like I've been really fortunate to have mentors that I've latched myself onto that are marketing executives or CEOs, and that's been incredibly valuable. But at the core of it, I'm just repeating what Nora said, which is learning on the job and exposing, or taking advantage of the colleagues that you've got in these other functional groups is the best way that I've been able to learn this stuff. So.
Great. Well, thank you for the panelists for this time of moderated and questions. What we're now going to do is a small group discussion that's actually going to be 3 Zoom breakout rooms. So you'll each be randomly assigned one, and each one of the speakers will be in there as well. So it's a little bit of a smaller forum, more intimate, able to ask those questions and dig deeper into some of the specific questions that some of you may have. We're then going to come together for a larger group QA and then do networking after that. So I believe one of my BPMA colleagues is manning the Zoom breakout rooms and will be broken out in any moment. And this is when I wish I had the background music playing again.
Okay, everyone should have received an invite.
Excellent.
Go for it.
Excellent. Well, welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed the small panel session. Hopefully, again, a more intimate setting to allow you to engage with the speakers and ask specific questions. That wasn't all the time for that. We certainly wanted to make room for larger Q&A here and have all of the panelists here in individual questions. So we'd love to do Q&A one of two ways. Either feel free to come off mute and ask your question directly, or if you'd prefer, or in a setting that doesn't allow you to do that, please do feel free to enter it into the chat and we can moderate on your behalf.
I'll start with the planted question, only because I know the three of you, and I didn't intend this, but all three of you have MBAs. How much do you think that actually helped with being product managers, if at all?
I'll say, you know, for me personally, my undergrad education was computer engineering, and I took literally 0 business classes while I was in undergrad. Don't ask me why. That was my decision, but I did not. And so when I went to work for my first role, which I shared earlier, right, at Microsoft, I did feel like I needed to go back to school just to get some grounding in business related academics. So it was super valuable to me. Plus it was a hell of a time. So.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I don't think I needed it probably. But yeah, I agree with John. Like it was an incredible experience, a lot of fun. If more than anything, I think it opened up my eyes to just a lot of things. I mean, up to that point, I had worked at one company, and I had, you know, the good fortune to have a number of different roles within that one company across different functional areas and different geographic locations. But I was still pretty darn naive in terms of what was out there in the broader world. So I think for me personally, that was a greater benefit. And then certainly, like John and I both went to Berkeley, and for me, like having that on my resume, I think has helped too. And I think, you know, when you're looking for jobs, sometimes that's an added advantage. But I think you can achieve a lot of these things without an MBA, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely pro MBA if there's an opportunity to get one. I think it's one of those things that vests over time. The sheer irony of having an MBA in product is that it probably might not matter that much for the first couple of product roles you hold, but it's going to fast track you once you hit middle management and above. You're going to find that you are a native speaker of, you know, of TLAs, of 3-letter acronyms, right? And so that's not to say that it's impossible to learn that stuff without an MBA, but it gives you a bump in that direction. I think for me as well, just yeah, an engineer by training as well. I think what an MBA really helped me figure out is the incentives, right? If you understand people's incentives, you can understand how they'll act. And as a product person who's trying to parse all these different inputs coming from sales, coming from customer success, coming even from your customers, and how, you know, your users and how they are compensated by their bosses or what have you in a B2B context, I think having an understanding of all of that, an MBA fast tracks that and makes you more effective in that kind of business context. But by no means is it the only way to get there. And, you know, time on the job at a good org, if you find yourself in that position, by all means, stick around, you know, ride it for all it's worth. But if you're looking to pivot, if you're looking for an eject button, MBA is a pretty effective one.
We had a question come through the chat that I'll ask now while other people are thinking of their questions. It was with regards to looking for mentors who may have a business leader, general manager mindset. Are there any particular things and considerations to look out for? What are some titles of some good mentors? What are attributes of good mentors, etc.? And maybe Nora, I'll start with you on that one.
I don't know if I have the best perspective on this one. I feel like a lot of the mentors I've picked up along the way, have been either official managers at some point or kind of like a leader in a cross-functional sense. So like a specific example, because that was kind of vague, but when I was out in APAC, I reported up the PM structure. So my boss actually sat in Canada, but there was a GM for all of APAC. And even though he wasn't my manager, we worked very closely together, and he was someone I very much respected. And so I've kind of collected individuals like that over the years that I now consider, like, I would probably apply the label friend first before mentor, but the reality is that they're definitely mentors as well. So there's not a title I look for. I think I've just been fortunate that I have interacted with a lot of people that are very business savvy, whether they were, the PM role or a little bit more on the business side.
I think I agree with Nora. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't like a formula for a specific title set that you should look for mentorship. I think it's really just what kind of relationships do you have out there, and probably the most important thing in terms of a mentee-mentor relationship is what you as the mentee are taking the initiative to drive that relationship, to have those conversations, to ask those questions. So it really kind of falls on your shoulders to seek out who are the right people to meet with, to strike up those conversations, to join, product organizations like this one, right? This networking organization or others. And then what are the types of conversations you're going to have with those folks? I would, in fact, I would challenge everyone here, if you don't have a mentor or are mentoring somebody, is to try to have that experience, because I think there's always some takeaway, some nugget that I would hope you would be able to find in that type of relationship. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the attribution of this saying is, and pardon the new agey-ness of it all, but like there's the saying, when the student is ready, the master will appear, right? I think going out and seeking a mentor is a worthwhile, it's a worthwhile endeavor, but it often backfires. And like, you're not looking for somebody with a specific title. I think having been first product hire at 2 startups so far, and having had, bosses who have had varying degrees of product experience, it's really about what are you looking to learn and who can you learn it from? And those may be people who come from entirely different disciplines. They may be people, there's plenty you can learn from folks who are like you, senior to you, but like you, or come from the same background. But there is potentially more you can learn, or, as valuable stuff that you can learn from folks in other disciplines as well. Listening to how sales operates, listening to how customer success operates, listening to how your peers even are operating in different parts of the org, and understanding how their decision-making processes go through. All of that can help you refine your approach within the context of your business, but also generally. So don't look for titles. You can learn from someone who is junior to you, and I just do not grok to this idea of like an Obi-Wan style mentor who will appear and guide you. It doesn't usually play out that way. But if you keep an open mind and you take the good bits and pieces from the folks you meet along the way, you'll find yourself much better for it at the end.
I just want to jump in and say BPMA has a really great mentorship program, and they do match you up with someone. So you don't, it's not awkward to be like, will you be my mentor? They already signed up to be a mentor, and then you just match with them, and you can have that style of mentorship. So I've had 3 mentors so far over 3 years, and it's been so amazing. Really great learning experience. So I just stuck the link in the chat if anyone wants to sign up.
And that was not a planted question, by the way. But I'll take another question that came through the chat. Thank you to everyone. Perhaps by someone who's interested in getting an MBA, they asked about a specific skill that you might learn during your time there, which is how do you learn to engage with cross department groups, cross-discipline groups, whether it's design or engineering? And maybe John, I'll ask you to lead this one.
I will do my best. Was the question to like how, like what I took away from my MBA in terms of how to most effectively build those bridges with other cross-functional groups? Was that the question?
Yes, that was the question.
Okay.
Is those particular sets of skills, is that something that you honed during your MBA or in another place?
Gotcha. Well, I'd say, you know, whether it's in an MBA program or it's just on the job, it's really putting yourself in those positions where you have an opportunity to meet other people. So on the in terms of an MBA program, that you're sort of forced to do that, right? Whether it's through social functions with people that you would never hang out with otherwise, or through networking, professional networking opportunities. That sort of thing is nice when it comes to the MBA program, certainly for somebody like me who's very introverted and geeky. So, you know, to be able to have that experience, that opportunity was awesome. But it doesn't mean you have to go get an MBA to learn how to reach out to people and get to know your counterparts in marketing. I think what I would just throw out there is people, in my experience, if you show that curiosity and that willingness to learn and to get to know somebody, even on the job, like literally slacking a counterpart in marketing or sales and just saying, hey, I want to take you out to coffee and learn about your role, and or it's at the company lunch if those ever start up again in person, you know, just being able to sit down and eat a meal with somebody who you wouldn't normally interact with on a day-to-day.
Mhm.
Like that's about the same as what we did in our MBA programs, just it would be on the job.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they're just people. So it's just a matter of, yeah, showing curiosity and engaging it. And I was going to mention the lunch thing too, back when we had lunch in an office, especially when I first joined the company. I would just go get my lunch and sit down next to random people every day. And at first, you know, people are kind of like, what? Like, who are you? But if you just say like, hey, I'm from the product team and I'd love to hear more about what you do, people love talking about themselves. And I learned so much about the company and had then contacts all over the company that I could lean on if I'm like, help me understand this, or what's the pulse, what's going on over here. And 9 times out of 10, I also would stumble across some totally unexpected synergy. Like, you're working on that. Well, we're talking about that. Like, let's talk more about that. And if you didn't engage in those types of conversations, which I know are much, much harder to do now, that serendipity wouldn't happen. So however you can facilitate that, I think is really valuable.
The angle I'll throw into that is obviously relationships matter, but in moving the unwieldy thing that is an organization, I think process also matters, and understanding process and how people operate. I mean, absolutely pro having good relationships with everybody, but so much as well of, you know, of day to day, depending on where you are, is delegating or writing tickets or passing tickets along to some other department or getting a wireframe from some other department and so on and so forth. And really immersing yourself in understanding that process, where it's come from and what scars that the organization has that have led it to run a particular way, is also a very worthwhile endeavor, I found, in addition to talking to people and establishing those relationships. Because ideally you want to be in the place where you start to change that process and you guide the org as a whole to something that works faster, better, smoother.
I'll throw out there, I don't know how many Slack users there are, but I would assume a large percentage of this group probably uses Slack. There's this plugin called Coffee Buddies. I don't know if has anyone seen this? It's like, I think it's just a plugin for Slack, but it randomly matches up the people within your Slack group to set up virtual coffees. And you know, for one of the companies I've worked with, it's been pretty cool, right? It's just sort of randomly matching you up with somebody to meet across the org. So maybe that's another way to put yourself in that position to meet people.
If I may chime in here to ask one question, I think that's kind of related to one point brought up earlier. So I'm wondering, like, as a junior member of the team, as a junior product manager, like basically the context is we are a startup and we only have 2 PM. as a junior member and I'm new in the company, how can I advocate maybe for more projects that's with more impact rather than like being the day job of creating tickets and just like passing on and communicating between different teams? I wonder whether there's any advice on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd say that's the age-old challenge of determining how to spend your time. And those things like the tickets and the stand-ups those are the ones that are urgent, but not necessarily important, but they're always gonna smack you in the face. And some of the more strategy stuff is a little easier to back burner if you're not careful about it. So I think one is just like being really thoughtful about your time allocation. Another is thinking about, what decisions are, what Amazon uses, the like type 1 and type 2 decisions. And basically it's like, what's a reversible decision and what's not, and let go of some of the control of decisions that are ultimately completely reversible. And like a copy, for example, sometimes copy. What was that? Oh, no. But sometimes these decisions that we spend time on aren't all that important. So letting go of that control. And then finally, empowering your engineering team. This is something we've been doing more and more of lately. And so I actually spend almost no time in Jira. I haven't written a story in months and months. And I empower my engineers to do that. I create the specs and then they translate that into stories and they manage their backlog and execution. And it frees up time for me to think about strategy, research, et cetera. But you have got to make that happen. No one's going to come to you and say, do you want me to do these stories for you? No, so it's worth a shot.
And actually related to that point, could you guys, Michael, if you could show slide 9 again. I'm interested in your perspectives on how things change from the beginning of your career to the middle to as you're more senior, in terms of how you can gain that business perspective. In other words, how you exercise it, because it's going to be very different for a more junior person. But just thinking about, in your experience, how have you, what kind of business sorts of, how have you exercised a business perspective in the beginning of your career, the middle, and as you were more senior or experienced?
Yeah, I would respond to that, Steve. And I think it was Han, was that right, who asked the original question, that the advice I suppose I would give for folks who are just starting out on their product management career journey is, in addition to what Nora just called out, is as you meet folks across the org, if you have those opportunities, is to, one very tactical thing to do is just to see if there are broader meetings or lunch and learn type meetings or opportunities to actually start to get your hands dirty with activities that these other teams are doing, so that you can sort of learn on the job and take a broader perspective, not just absorbing, but doing as well. And so if you can find those opportunities, that's pretty cool. And then, as we talked about earlier, any mentorship opportunities you might have, there could be those opportunities as well to find out projects or activities that might give you, boost your chances of expanding your horizons there. To Steve's point, I'll just throw out there that, yeah, it was a lot of what I just described that I tried to get scrappy with, in terms of how I saw what was going on early in my career, and how I got involved, and then it was just a matter of focus, as I think it was Nora, like time management. It sort of became more of like managing out the parts of my original responsibilities that I could delegate to the people that I trust, and or really being very intentional about the things that I was investing my time in, which as I grew in terms of my product leadership roles, like when I was in director and VP roles, it was most of my time invested was like, how can I become a better manager? What kind of time can I spend with the people that I'm delegating directly to, so that they can be better managers. And so it really is like intentionality of how you spend your time and efficiency. I can say I'm not one to want to work 16 hours a day or 12 hours a day. Like I am always interested in how efficiently and effectively I can manage. And so that was a big part of, as I rose up the ranks, like how I focused.
Yeah, so maybe just to tie all of that together, if you find yourself stuck in ticket writing mode, to break the cycle, you need to, just a repetition, but maybe just adding a bit of a narrative thread, right? You need to go to the meetings where the decisions are being made. You need to ask why. You need to internalize that context. And then you need to turn around and download that context into whoever you're delegating to, be they engineers or junior product people. And that will give you the opportunity to free up your time. Once you've decentralized that decision, once you've delegated that decision, that will give you the opportunity then to spend time pondering the greater strategic questions, ponder correctly, and inevitably someone will notice and you will be promoted. I think is the summary of that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I got a question for folks. I see people coming into product management kind of from two directions. I've cultivated people who are subject matter experts with product management skills, and I've hired people who are really, I consider them professional product managers. They may not know my market industry. Does anybody have a strong opinion on which is the best to hire? What would you choose? Pick someone who knows the market and teach them product management, or hire someone who knows product management and teach them the market? Did I just say that backwards? But I think you know what I mean.
All right. So David's in here trying to start a fight, and I think he will succeed. But my 2 cents, I think hire a generic product manager, if you will. A good product manager will be able to come up to speed on the relevant domain areas. Granted, that's not universal. Like, I think hiring someone who's a generalist and asking them to delve into a super technical or an extremely highly regulated, acronym-filled, jargon-filled field is maybe taking this to the extreme. But I think the other reason that I, apart from the obvious bias, why I lean generic product manager is a lot of good product management is questioning assumptions. It's validating stuff. Part of the challenge that I've historically seen with subject matter experts in orgs in product capacities or elsewhere is that you get a lot of this is the way it's always been done, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's also sometimes healthy to step back from that, take a second look at it. I think that's where innovation comes from. I think that's where, the 10x efficiency boost on that process will come from, or where the next big thing is going to come from. That's not to say that domain experts can't bring that to the table, but I've just observed that the tendency to question domain experts when they are the domain experts, people tend to shy away from that.
That was pretty good. I don't really have much to add.
Yeah, I agree.
So I guess if I could ask the flip side to that. So I'm a product manager with domain expertise. As I'm looking for a new job, I've been kind of looking for other product management jobs in the same domain. Would you recommend, sort of branching out of that?
I'll throw out there, I'm if you look at my experience to date, it probably speaks to my answer, which is I've found it really valuable to experience different domains, different markets, and but that's me. Like, I've found that really interesting, and I've used it to my advantage career-wise. But that there's no one size fits all answer to that, right? It kind of comes down to what your passions are and whether it's in and around how you expand your product management skills as a craft, or whether you go deep into a specific domain.
Great, thank you.
I think we have time for just one more question before we wrap up.
I had a quick question. I'm definitely more on the business side, I think, and sometimes I struggle with finding a way to translate all of the business strategy that I absorb from other areas of our company and handing it down to other product people at my organization and giving them the context they need to make smart business decisions even when I'm not around. Do you have any suggestions on translating a lot of business information to the functional teams that are actually building the product?
So it's hard without specifics, I think, to give a concrete answer. But like even just what you said, a lot of business information already scares me because they're not going to consume a lot. So the more you can distill it into like, what are the 2 or 3 things that they really, really need to know and care about? And either having the rest is almost like an appendix type thing or whatnot. But especially if this is foreign to them a little bit, you've got to really help them narrow in and focus on what is the most important thing. And then of course, explaining why and how it ladders directly into what they're doing. And then, laddering the other way is even more important. Therefore, when you build this, it's going to cause all of these customer outcomes and business impact, and that should get them excited. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but.
Yeah. What I'll throw in there as well is, communication can be tricky on the best of days, and you are absorbing massive amounts of information and trying to distill some of that. But also, again, leaning a bit on process, frameworks, the way you approach a problem, there is an order and a structure to your thinking. We don't often realize it, but if you take the time to make that order and structure explicit, then you potentially have given someone the tool that they need in addition to some business context, but maybe not a ton. But it's business context plus this is how I would think about it. They may not reach the same conclusion, but at least now they know where you stand. And if there's a discussion to be had about, why I wouldn't go this way, then it's a much more informed discussion.
What they said.
Great. Well, I think that was the last question. Charlie, correct me if I'm incorrect here. But what we're now going to do is break out into smaller groups to enable networking, and also a call out to the event feedback survey that we'd love your thoughts on. That's in the chat now. So if you could take a moment to do that after you're done networking, that would be greatly appreciated.